Welcome to today's Google Hangout. We've got a great show for you today. Unfortunately, we're going to start off with a little bit bad news. First, a couple non-line of duty deaths. Paramedic retired U.S. Army Sergeant John Paul, can you pronounce the last name? Kalowski from the Algonquin Lake Hills Fire Department passed. He was a good friend to fire engineering and FDIC, and also his chief is Peter Van Dorp. I always mispronounce everybody's name. I apologize. And also someone near and dear to our hearts is Dennis Peters, retired battalion chief from Jersey City, just passed. And Billy Peters is on the board with us for fire engineering. His brother was a veteran, and he was also a Jersey City battalion chief. With a heavy heart, we talk about our line of duty death, and that is firefighter Nathan Flynn. Ours is a dangerous job, and our line of duty deaths aren't just numbers. They really represent the best of humanity, trying to do something for our fellow men and women. You know, it's always been said, if there's an elephant in the room, introduce it. So that's usually what I like to do. Surrounding Nathan's death and legacy is he should be remembered for exactly who he was: a husband, father, and FDIC instructor, and and a firefighter for Howard County. And there's been some inappropriate posts, and I think a lot of it comes from just hurt of losing a brother firefighter. So I always try to take that stuff as a grain of salt. And what I tell all my members is, listen, when you're about to put something on social media, don't ever put anything on social media that makes you feel good when you're angry or you're hurt, because a lot of times it's going to be taken the wrong way and it's going to be put in the wrong direction. Nathan Flynn should be remembered for being a father, a firefighter, an instructor, and his legacy will live on. And our thoughts and prayers are with the family. I tweeted out last night links to the GoFundMe page that was set up by Howard County. From all aspects and everybody I've talked to, he was a phenomenal firefighter, and I think the people that he touched will carry on that legacy. PJ put together a great show today, and I'll let him introduce our guest. We might have some connection problems. I know Sean Gray was trying to do the show from the outside, so we'll try to figure out if the forest is cooperating today or not. He knows I love him. So, PJ, go ahead.
Always fires the first shot. I love it. All right, so thanks for joining us today. We've got a big group today, and with just about an hour to cover the show, there will be a lot of banter back and forth. We'll try to keep it to the hour. But I just want to introduce everybody that we have here. First, we have Shay Filkowski. Shay's a firefighter in Richmond Fire Department, Minnesota. He's a fire department FDIC instructor. He's a current UL Tech advisory member. We have Tony Caro, as a battalion chief at the District of Columbia Fire Department. He's recently assigned to the Training Academy. He's also a life member. Oh boy, Chief, help me out there. How do you pronounce the volunteer department? He's on
Occoquan.
Woodbridge Lorton Volunteer Fire Department in Woodbridge, Virginia. He's also a UL Tech panel member. We have Battalion Chief Frank Lee from the Fire Department of New York, or FDNY, where he's assigned to Battalion 46. Additionally, he's a member of the East Farmingdale Volunteer Fire Department in Long Island. He's also a UL Tech panel member. He's a FDIC instructor and also involved in the National Fallen Firefighters Foundation UL Fire Dynamics Boot Camp. And lastly, definitely not least, we have Sean Gray, who's a captain in Cobb County, Georgia Fire Department. He's sat on previous tech panels for UL. He's a UL FRSI advisory board member. He's FDIC hot lead. And I know he's probably going to really kill me for bringing this up, but he's also a newly published book author, The Evolving Fireground, which has been published through Penwell and Fire Engineering. So today we have a whole host of individuals from around the country, from Georgia to FDNY to Frank Ricci, myself from Connecticut, to where else are we? To the District of Columbia. And we want to talk about the research a little bit, right? We want to talk about the implementation of the research. And one of the things that I find is interesting and sometimes frustrating is that there's a lot of debate over a lot of the research. And there's a lot of pushback against some of the research. But if you truly look at it, a lot of the debates are only around exterior water and a little bit of debate and controversy over vertical ventilation. But yet there's many more pieces of the research that we're not talking about and that we're not discussing. Take, for instance, the thermal imager limitations, door control, the structural stability of floor systems, how our PPE actually works, and how we should be deconning that PPE. Our understanding of one of the most basic foundations of what we do in fire behavior. Nothing showing means nothing showing. Is your department still using that terminology? Exterior fires, talk about exterior and attic fires. The exterior fires need to be addressed before it gets into that attic or before we move interior. Accessing the eaves and getting water into the eaves on attic fires. And the importance of timing on vertical ventilation. Yet there's that plus many more pieces of the research that seems to be kind of muted or pushed to the side because there's so much debate over the one piece of research on exterior water. So I want to talk about implementation and how do we as a service get to implementing a lot of those other pieces of the research that we should all be looking at how we could implement it within our departments. So before we get to that, there's a few questions that I have for all of the panel. And some of the debates surrounding the research is, those are just lab burns, right? Those are houses that are built in the laboratory. They don't really depict what we do in the street. So for those of you that have attended the lab burns, I want to know from you, how do those differ? How does the houses built in the lab differ from the acquired structures or from the real environment? How has your department implemented any of the research if you've been able to implement it? And if your department, you're speaking to a department across the country that's looking to figure out where they want to start implementing the research, because there are still a lot of departments that haven't made it to that point yet. Where do you think they should start? What do you think are some of those most important items? So we'll start, for the only reason, all the way to the left of the screen as I'm looking at it. Let's just start with Chief Lieb. Chief, if you want to give a little background of yourself, brief information more than we already covered, and kind of discuss some of that stuff, and then we'll move forward with Shay, and then we'll get to Chief Carroll.
All right. So it's interesting when you talk about the implementation of some of the different parts of the science. So for both of the departments I belong to, we've implemented some of the stuff, but a lot of it depends on the built environment. So I never was at any of the lab burns, but I did go to several days of the Governor's Island burns and then the most recent Sydney, Ohio burns. And it's just the tactical considerations that you put out. No one's saying what you need to do or should or shouldn't do. It's what your staffing, what all of your built environment means. Sean and myself had a pretty good conversation about this in Sydney, about when we would use transitional attack or when we wouldn't use it, and we had some differences, and part of that was based on our built environment. It's another tool in the toolbox, to use that old cliche, and it's not always my first consideration, and a lot of that is because of my built environment. Stretching a first line to the rear instead of into the front door for a second or third floor fire is not going to happen in New York City, where they may happen in some more rural departments.
Good points. And we'll get to Sean in a few minutes to have his input on that conversation. Let's go over to Chief Carroll. Chief, what is your opinion on the research burns at acquired structures versus the lab homes? And in your agency, have you been able to institute any of the research? And what do you feel are those important points of the research that departments should be looking to institute in their agencies?
Well, I think that the lab burns, were just that. You had to take away a lot of the variables, and then this allows you to kind of see, this is how a fire is going to behave. And then you can then apply that. Okay, if I meet up with a dog in the backyard, that's going to delay my re-entry. If I'm going to transition from the side over here on the Bravo side, and then take me to the A side, that's going to add time if I have fences and things like that to go in. So we couldn't put that into the lab burns. It would take forever. We would have way too many variables to consider. But that's up to you then to apply that to your fires. So I think that we had to do that. You have to have a place to start. And now that we're going to Sydney and then other places that we're going to go with this new study, all right, now we can start to apply some of that stuff and see how it reacts, what happens to us. But it really is up to you to then glean some of this research, get some stuff out of it, the bullets out of the research, and then take it back to where you work. Frank said about the built environment, and that's it, right? That's whether it's a 50-story high-rise or a 2-story row building with 20 row houses that you have to contend with. All right, now if I take this research and apply it to my built environment, that's what we need to do. But you have to start with the lab burns to get a basis. Again, fire behaves a certain way. I think we're seeing that with stuff out in the street. A lot of these basement fires, right? We've been doing some research in basement fires. They're not perfect storms. This is how basement fires behave, and we need to understand that. So I think what it also does, and maybe goes back to what you're saying, PJ, about we're not talking about some things. We do talk a lot about transitional attack, but we're not talking about the other things that have come out of the research, because a lot of the stuff we're seeing validates what we're doing. So not only is it bringing up new ideas, but it's also validating what we've been doing on the streets for a long time. As far as DC goes, we did put in some stuff specifically for basement fires. We issued some new standard operating guidelines in our department, and you'll see where a lot of the research it is influencing our decisions on basement fires. We haven't really got to, other than uncoordinated ventilation, but whether that was a research result or whether it was from fires that we've had, we're seeing that kind of emphasize in our SOGs.
Excellent. Frank,
yeah, I got a question that keeps coming up for the individuals that were at the burns. I had Nick Papa on the radio show, but he was only in the very first part of the burns. What was the result when they did roof ventilation coordinated with the application of water fire attack inside? Anyone? Tony?
Yeah, I wasn't at Sydney to witness that. So you'll have to get the other guys that were there to.
I think Chief Lee and Sean were there on different days. But Sean, were you there that day?
Yeah, well, we went and looked at the buildings actually with the LA guys because they were very interested in the vertical ventilation, and we went and toured them, but we didn't get to actually see the roof ventilation. We were there for horizontal ventilation, PPV, and then hydraulic ventilation. So we got to see those three. We didn't actually get to see the roof ventilation. So I know there were some concerns from some of the panel members for coordinated attack that the roof wasn't exactly how they would like to see, or the hole wasn't in the exact place that maybe they had cut it. So they're going to try to recreate that in some further experiments. And that's one of the things about the acquired structures is that they are all different. So versus the lab, I've been to both now. And, the biggest difference is that the room sizes that we saw in the building that I was there with Frank was those rooms were huge. They had like 12-foot ceilings. So you got to think of the fire dynamics within that box. That's going to change from structure to structure where it doesn't make it repeatable. So the lab makes it very repeatable. So you can repeat each tactic and then kind of compare them, where you really can't do that in an acquired structure because of the variation in size of the actual rooms.
Great point. Shay? Where's Shay? Did he go on a run? Shay is working today, so he may have had to go out on a run. Shay, if you're there, if you want to unmute and join us. Nope, he's gone. Well, that was a quick show, right?
That was a quick show. We're over. Shay left.
Yeah. So Chief Lee, you represent obviously the largest department here. For me and my department, if I want to make some changes, it's a lot easier. I have 44 members, not including our volunteer staff, so we can implement changes very quickly, very easily, as long as we get the officer cadre, on board. Things can happen very quickly. In your agency, who's extremely progressive to begin with, it's not as easy to make change. What parts of the research have you looked at, maybe within your battalion, within the companies that you oversee, that you feel are really important, regardless of how big or how small of an agency is, to start implementing?
Well, so that's a good question, because it does take a longer time for us to implement something. It takes For us to put everybody through education day, a one-day training that all firefighters attend, that takes just about 1 year to do. Now, we have other in-service training and stuff like that that works. But what we see is we've implemented research. The important stuff to me is the stuff about coordinating the ventilation with suppression. Our ventilation bulletin, although we've been coordinating ventilation for quite some time, June 1st, it was 5 years old that we initially published it. And we actually have a committee together now that's reevaluating to make sure that it has all of the components in it that it does, and we'll update it if it's necessary later this year. We've updated our search bulletin, our engines bulletin, our multiple dwelling bulletin had been rewritten. Our ladders bulletins, some of them have had some of the science incorporated. But for a department any size that's looking to implement something, you have to take it piece by piece and implement what your department can handle at the time. If you try and implement 15 different things at once, I can tell you that will be a failure. Pick a couple of things that you'll have that buy-in, that maybe there's a base of agreement on, and implement those changes first and build off of that. As you educate your firefighters and the fire officers, change will happen as they see the research and they really delve into the important parts of all of these different studies. And we've incorporated some of the basement fire stuff as well. We still have some ways to go with that, and with some of the transitional attack and exterior streams. But again, we implement it as we can without overwhelming the system by putting too many changes into place at one time.
Great points. Chief Carroll?
Yeah, we did put some stuff specific to basement fires in our new SOGs. Unfortunately, it was simply a 4-hour class that we offered each member on the new SOGs. So there was a lot of stuff to cover in those 4 hours. Hopefully, the instructors that presented the class hit on the important stuff and the changes that are happening. One thing we did have, which kind of helped out, was we had an incident just before the SOG changes came out that emphasized water in a basement from the outside. Again, kind of a tough thing for us to swallow, but the size of the building revealed that there was no exterior entrance to the basement. So it was going to have to come either down the interior stairs, which was going to be too tough of a push, or come from some other way. And there were some windows that got us access. And some of the guys that were involved with that, they get a lot of respect on the job. So that helped with some buy-in to the new stuff. Again, it was the rollout of the SOGs probably could have been a 32-hour class, but it was done in really 4 hours to get it out. My job is about 2,000 people, not as big as Frank's, but it does take time for us to get stuff out to them. And I think that's one of the struggles that we're having from a leadership standpoint, is maybe we don't do that because of how long it's going to take and the cost associated with something new. So we really struggle with that.
And remember, for those that are listening today and want to join in the conversation or ask a question to somebody in the panel, use the hashtag FETalk on Twitter. Post your comment or question, and we'll pose it to the board for you. So thanks for joining us today, and feel free to get involved in the conversation. I want to go to Sean Gray. So I know that he's done some implementation in Cobb County. They've changed their search culture the last couple of years, or maybe even a little bit longer, search culture. And he's also incorporated some door curtains, right? Nothing that I've been able to accomplish in my department because it just doesn't work, right? Door curtains aren't for everybody. And you know what? They're not for Cobb County in the way they were initially put in place. But as somebody already alluded to, once you start educating firefighters, we'll start asking more questions. As we start asking more questions, we try to figure out a way to answer those in the fireground. And we have a tool like a door curtain. In Sean's case, it's kind of added to their search culture, not intentionally in Cobb. Sean? You're muted, Sean.
Mute now.
There you go.
Sorry about that. Sorry, Frank. Frank's giving me a dirty eye right there. All right. So anyway, kind of where we started from the beginning was really with fire behavior training with the recruits at the recruit level, getting fire dynamics and fire behavior and kind of adding more hours in. Started with burning dollhouses and stuff like that. Well, then from there, we have like training groups. We have a search group, vent group, ladders group. We started incorporating all the research and the fire dynamics pieces into those. So from search, we started talking about door control, door isolation, isolating ourselves, isolating the victims, that kind of stuff. And really started pushing the points. Well, where the door curtains came in was because of a hotel fire that we had. And we had like 46 civilian rescues. It's a legendary fire within my department, and people talk about it. And the current deputy chief was on one of the nozzles on that fire. So it helped with his implementation. Because of this fire, we went back and looked at it. And what we did was we got there and we opened up the stairwells and, attached hose lines. We filled the stairwells with smoke. And the fire was on floor 2 and extended to floor 3. But that was really it. Fire kind of went out pretty quickly, except that we trapped all those people on floors 4 through 10. And so we went back and looked at that and went, hey, this is a problem. Let's try not to do this. So how can we do that? And that's where the door curtains came in. So we initially put them on our ladder companies that are in the high-rise districts. And they were there for about a year and they trialed them. But because we had done some flow path and some fire behavior training already, the guys out at those stations, once they got them, it wasn't even 2 days. And they were like, hey, what about because nobody really likes door control. Nobody wants to close that door behind them. We had been educated on it, but people were somewhat resistant to it. So they were like, hey, what about throwing this up at the front door of a residence? Would that work? Sure. Why wouldn't it? So now, depending on the company and where they are, we have companies that are going in when the truck pulls up, they get assigned a search. They come off with that curtain. And as they go in the front door, if fire attack doesn't have door control in place, the curtain goes up. And then, of course, we're using it for smoke isolation all around the Brave Stadium and stuff like that. And all of our multi-story buildings, we've had multiple fires up in there where the curtains have absolutely prevented further damage and smoke from spreading throughout the structure.
New Haven is experimenting with the door curtains now. We put them on the trucks in the high-rise districts. So we figured that'd be a good way to get buy-in, because we all know any high-rise fire that you're at, even though you put a chief on that annunciator panel to say, protect in place or use this staircase, no one's ever listening to that announcement, whether they're going to stay. They're going to go down the staircase they're most comfortable with or the closest one. That's just an operational reality. So if we can keep that stairway clear, I think that's huge. The other thing that, and Tony, I believe you know him, Josh Miller from DC is on my job in New Haven now. And I think he's the one that brought it up here. And I believe it started in DC, is now all of our truck guys have the clamps that they get at Home Depot clipped onto their coats. So on a residential structure or even in a tenement, they're taking the clamp off their coat, clipping it on the door and shutting the door, and the door doesn't lock. It's kind of like the new improved door chock. And then when the engine company comes up, they can take that clamp off and then just put it on the hinge, and it keeps the door not open fully, but it does keep it open enough so they can still facilitate a clean stretch and still maintain the door. So that's been very successful. One of the problems that we're seeing now is, and Frank and Tony kind of brought to it, is that the chief's office got to realize that training is a continual thing, and it takes so long. And once you do something new, then you have to refresh on it. You can't just do it once and then think that it's going to go away. So you got to keep refreshing on it. And if that means if your department trained everybody in trench last year, well, guess what? You got to train them again this year. It's not just a checkbox. So if you're changing your tactics for your basement fires or search, you have to make sure that there's every skill is perishable. There's some continuation of that training. It may not have to be the same length of time, but we got to make sure we're still putting it in. And one thing that I find works real well in New Haven, especially because I'm kind of removed from the training academy now, but I do go to calls, is after the call is over, talk to everybody while they're still on scene and kind of walk them through that fire, or walk your command staff through and kind of reiterate all those key points at the fire.
I think those are some great points. And, every agency has different challenges, right? Different challenges to implement any of the research, regardless of whether you're small or big, and it comes down to the training, but also the education of the training staff, making sure that your training staff is getting the education, getting the knowledge, and actually understands that information, so then they could relay that down to the troops out in the street to make the difference. Chief Lieb, you mentioned a little earlier that you and Sean Gray had an interesting discussion in Sydney, and I know Sean was explaining that to me. So I'm going to go back to you for a few minutes and explain that a little bit further. You said that how in New York City that wouldn't happen, but in Georgia it would happen. And what's the differences there? And then I want to get Sean's perspective on it.
Yeah, so we were having a conversation about when we would institute a transitional attack, or when we would consider it. And, you know, so the conversation is always, seems to always go back and forth about, you know, how fast we can get something into place, or how, you know, the time piece of it, and all of that. And so much of that comes down to, again, it goes the built environment, what you have, and is it practical? So if we have a multiple dwelling, right, we're going to stretch a dry hose line to the fire floor, and we're gonna stretch it and charge it, and then we'll go into the fire room, fire apartment with the charged hose line. If I take an exterior hose line in that building, and I spray water from the exterior to, say, the third floor, I'm actually delaying the placement of that hose line. So in those scenarios, the first line, if I bring it to the exterior, I'm likely going to delay getting, you know, I have my searches in progress, everything else going on. But we were also discussing that I will have the first line go interior, and depending on where the fire is, I will have a second line that I can stretch, because I always want one more line than I actually need, right? So that backup line can potentially be used as an exterior line. So for me, in my built environment, I try and train my firefighters in my area that we're going to go, the first line is going to try and get to the seat of the fire in the fastest way possible, and our second line may be used for a transitional attack. But we have the manpower to do something like that. But additionally, our built environment prohibits that transitional attack in many different cases. As was mentioned earlier, dogs in the backyard, or how long it's going to take. Sometimes to get around to the rear of a structure in our area, that's all the way around the block, because it's a block of attached structures. So, you know, it's implementing what research works in your area. It's, you know, there's no silver bullet, right? It's what tactics work for your area, and what works for one dwelling may not work for another. And those are important considerations to look at, and not to just say, I'll never do that, or I'll always do that, because always and never are usually bad terms in our business.
Absolutely, and there's no one answer for any department, for any fire, you know, and it's always going to be what's going to work best for your fire that you're standing in front of, or that you're in command of. You know, and I know Sean will probably mention to it, and it's interesting you mentioned on the timing. What I think that a lot of training divisions miss is they don't even know, or even company officers, how long it's going to take their company to stretch that line interior. So if you have to stretch to the second floor for room and contents fire, how long is it going to take your company, obviously without any, you know, hoarding conditions or any unforeseen challenges, but on a standard 2-story private dwelling, how long is it going to take you to make that stretch? Because how could you make a good, educated, tactical decision if you're going to use exterior water if you don't know how long it's going to take to deploy that interior line? Because the goal is to get the water to the fire the quickest manner possible. So if you don't know what's quicker, you can't even make that good decision.
Well, that's right. So to me, the timing piece comes down to take a couple of your crews and time them and see. So the timing piece is going to be different in my career department than it is in my volunteer department, right? So I don't know how many people are coming necessarily in my volunteer department. So am I more likely to put water in a transitional attack in my volunteer department? I may, because it may be a tactic of necessity, you know, where in New York City, I'm going to have a significant number of firefighters on scene for a working fire. So again, it's all the built environment, the staffing, the training. You know, the training's been mentioned by several of us here today. And yeah, we got to keep training on that. You should have an idea of how long your engine crew takes to stretch a line to the second floor, and they should be training on that. And that's the timepiece. Then you have the timepiece for your department, and not, you know. So when we do it with the study, to me, I look at the timing piece. You know, it's the 18th time the same crew has stretched it. They better be better at it on the 18th try than they were on the first. So the timing piece, to me, the value of that is lessened due to that. Where the timing piece, I can figure out the timing piece based on my firefighters, and then I can change that by training them or coming up with what works for my built environment. Again, looking at the entire study and the different pieces and the tactical considerations that I should be considering for my department.
But don't you think also like we didn't consider exterior water because of the damage it might do to the people on the inside? Well, now we know from the study that there's already water content inside the building as a byproduct of the fire. So the little bit of water that I'm going to spray, and I'll take a scenario. My scenario would be we recently had a fire in a vacant building, but the guys knew that it wasn't really vacant, right? There was vagrants and stuff like that. So the place had been boarded up really tight. By the time they were working on the front door, it had plywood. It was going to take a while to get through. Fires blowing out of a window on the Bravo side on the first floor. Again, from culture and what we never did, we're not putting water on that fire. We're not putting water on that fire. We're going to wait till that plywood gets cut off, and we're going through the front door. So two lines. I mean, two companies are backed up while they're waiting for this forcible entry to get done. Now we can say from research that, look, the water we're going to play into that window right there is not going to affect the people on the inside. It's just going to put the fire out. It's going to make conditions better. So whether it's timing that Frank's talking about, or just, again, the consideration of what we learned from the research is that the victims, the people aren't going to be impacted by the water we're going to play in from that side window. So it's a total research, not just picking apart the timing and the water and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and that's a good point, right? Because in that scenario that you just laid out, we absolutely should be putting water into that window on the 2 or B side. Plus, with the delay, the vacant building, there's a chance if that building was totally fully involved, we would be using exterior water in the form of a tower ladder. So, you know, there's lots of ways to put exterior water onto a fire. And when there's a delay, that second line, I mean, you have the staffing as well. That second line can easily then go to put water into that fire and prevent it from expanding, because eventually it's going to expand to the exposures, not just the second floor or throughout.
Yeah, but see, it's opposite for departments like Shay and I, you know, working for suburban departments. He's suburban Minneapolis, I'm suburban Atlanta. And so for us, we may pull up. So the fire that Frank and I were talking about, it was a 2-story home with fire venting from the alpha side. Well, on that, we could pull up with a 3-man engine. Maybe we'll get lucky and have a 4th for the day, but likely 3 persons. So they're going to pull up. Firefighter's going to get out, pull the line to the front door. And while the line's being stretched, the line's likely going to be charged and ready to go before the officer even completes his size up or walk around and gets to the front door. So while that gets done, hopefully a good company is going to get it done in less than 60 seconds. They may flow some water from the outside while the officers are there now getting to the front door to enter the structure. We're not going to enter the structure with just one person. So that's where the exterior streams for us, knowing that, one, we're not going to cause harm to victims, you know, is an advantage for us. And is it happening in every company in Cobb County? No, absolutely not. There's still guys out there like, I'll never put water in from the outside. You know, and that's one of those bravado things. But for most people in the U.S. that don't work in New York or D.C., you know, exterior water is definitely an option due to the staffing. Jay.
Yeah, I agree with you, Sean. I think first off, sorry I had a run. I don't have to explain to you guys that duty comes first. So sorry I missed the beginning, but thanks for having me on. Yeah, I think in my department, with our size and our staffing model, I mean, we can have what we call engine couples, where we have a driver and an officer, and we have to be able to pull water on it from the exterior. It's just not an option, because we're not going to be able to go interior until we get that second company there, and we need to do something about the problem. So I think Sean spelled it out pretty pretty clearly for Cobb County, and at Richfield, it's the same way. If we pull up, and we have 3 people on the engine, while the officer's doing that 360, our firefighters all know that if they can hit fire from the outside, they're going to do that with there's some considerations that they're going to make. Obviously, they're going to, and this is where sometimes I think the research doesn't necessarily reach the audience, is how to do it, why to do it, and when to do it. Of course, it's going to be dictated by your available resources and your training. Obviously, have you done it before? And you have to manage those things. But for us here at Richfield, if we can hit fire from the outside while that officer is doing that 360, we're going to do that to not only make the conditions better for us when we finally do go through the front door, but also for the victims. So it just makes sense. And we have a very small department, so we don't have people, outliers, who are arguing that point. We don't have a lot of people who don't agree with it. There's only about 30 of us in the department, so we're able to be a pretty agile department with some of the implementing of the tactics.
Yeah, and again, I would say that's one of the considerations, right? The staffing, the tactics. For us at 360, we have firefighters that are going to the rear. Our officer isn't necessarily doing a 360 because, again, it could take him quite a long time to get around. But if we have fire venting out the front windows of a 1 or 2 story private dwelling, yeah, we need to be considering putting exterior water into that, because we're not bringing a charged hose line into a private dwelling. We're not bringing an uncharged hose line. We're going to charge it outside. So you're there anyway. 5, 10, 20 seconds of water isn't going to delay. My concern is with some of the research with the staffing of departments is that it's never used to, so staffing, we should always be fighting for staffing that meets NFPA 1710, which would be 15 firefighters for a 1 or 2 story private dwelling. So if we're moving in that direction and not using that to not meet that standard, then that's good. But I don't want to see the transitional attack be used as a means to not have to comply, to try to reach that standard.
Chief, I agree. I was very recently told about a story. There's a chief here in Connecticut who feels that transitional attacks should be used on every fire. We're going to flow water from the outside for 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 minutes till we get all our companies there, and then we'll go in place and we'll go interior. And we know that's not transitional attack. That's a defensive operation until you get enough staffing there, and then you may change over to interior operations. Probably going to be late. The number one failure of transitional attack is not rapidly transitioning into the interior. It's not to be used as an excuse to stand outside to flow water. It could be used to help justify staffing, to help show the political figureheads what we truly need on the fireground. Departments like ours, I'm running only 11 per shift. If it wasn't for our volunteer companies, we would never have enough firefighters arrive on scene. And nowadays we're even losing that piece. We went to a box last Sunday, I think it was, on a Sunday evening at 5 p.m. on a Sunday. You couldn't get down the street from all of our volunteers showing up. Last week I had 1 volunteer member show to a fire in a commercial building on a Sunday afternoon. That's unheard of. So the impact of the volunteer service is really impacting us here in Connecticut as nationwide. So those are things that we can look at to use to our advantage to help us. Sean, I can see you want to jump in on this. You're at the edge of your seat.
Yeah. So the timing piece. All right. So, you guys know everything's been going on social media recently, and the timing stuff that came out of the fire attack study. So in my opinion, it's just total BS, right? So in the lab, the way that we set up, it's so, just like Chief Carroll said in the beginning, so difficult. There's so many variables for the timing piece. I could easily argue that if you hit the fire from the exterior, especially in the lab, you could easily go to the interior much faster than you could on an interior attack without reducing those temperatures. You're going to be able to go in with a reduction of temperatures on a 1-story, just like the fire attack study had, walk right down that hallway to the fire room and finish it off. That's just reality. However, the fire attack study didn't do that. The interior crew, as they entered, they had to get down low, and they chose the technique of sliding down the hallway. Well, I'm not ever going to do that on a fire if I've already hit it from the outside. I can walk right in there and finish the thing off. So it's going to be much faster. So the arguments of, well, we didn't see this, versus transitional attack versus interior attack, that's just a bunch of BS. I mean, that's somebody trying to validate their point through timing. And these studies really aren't about the actual tactics. They're about how these tactics affect the fire environment. And that's what we really need to, focus on, is the fire dynamics piece. The stream study, or the fire attack study, was how the water was affecting the fire environment and how was it affecting the victims that were possibly in there. That's what it was looking at. It wasn't a comparison of interior versus exterior attack. Those were just pieces that the technical panel decided, hey, my department, like Shay, hey, we use transitional attack, so I want to see what it's going to do. Is it going to steam victims? Well, it does the same. Water is water. Any water that strikes a victim or comes down on top of them was shown to have a small temperature spike. And Chief Carroll was part of that attack panel. He can tell you that it showed about a 30-degree temperature spike when water droplets hit those victim packages. And on interior attack as well. So that means that we're scalding victims on interior attack, the same as we could be scalding them on exterior attack.
And I wanted to go to Chief Carroll, Sean, because he mentioned something a few minutes ago regarding what we know now as far as the interior environment prior to water being applied, whether that's water is being applied from the exterior or for the interior. So maybe Chief Carroll could expand on that a little bit and hit the points that you were just discussing as well as a member of that technical panel.
Yeah, what we saw was that the water concentration in the building, again, we know that water vapor is a byproduct of the fire, of combustion, right? So the study showed that the concentration that was in the building prior to fire attack happening was such that when the fire attack did occur, it didn't raise it up very much. The fire attack did not impact the water concentration, the water vapor that was in the building. So I think that's a pretty cool a new revelation. Again, that we know that there's already a lot of water vapor in that building, and the water that we applied, again, it was seconds of worth of water, but that's pretty much what we're doing on a real fire, anyways. What we found 40 gallons of water in our fire attack did not increase the water vapor tremendously, or did not have a big impact on the water vapor that was inside there.
I think one of the issues, and Frank alluded to it earlier, is it's not one size fits all. It is going to be dictated by your staffing and consideration of how long it takes to transition. And lo and behold, as we've been saying for 100 years in the fire service, the circumstances are going to dictate the action. And I think that one of the problems that we see on social media and with this is everybody's talking and nobody's really listening. And they just cherry pick what they get out of this to kind of make their own false narrative. Like the chief says, you got to stand outside for 8 minutes. That's absurd. Like Frank, in New Haven, we don't have a company officer doing 360. It wouldn't be able to get around the house. That's the RIT team's job, is to get a do a 360 or to get a look at the rear of the building or the guy on the roof or girl on the roof, the radio out to command. So you got to kind of put all the different pieces, puzzles, but we got to be willing to be educated and not just shut off the science and everything that's going on here, because people are cherry picking on it on both sides, and we really need to have an honest conversation.
Well, can I butt in again? Can I butt in again real quick? I'm sorry, Shay, but that was one of the concerns about, and I'm sure we're going to see this at the end of this study, is that we really were concerned again with how it's going to be cherry picked, like you said, and they're going to go straight to chapter 7. They're going to go straight to the executive summary. They're not going to read the whole thing. So it's almost like we need to have a class on how to read the report, how to interpret the study. Because I was lucky enough to go out west with Dennis Laguerre. He was on the panel with us, and we presented a couple of classes out west in the Pacific Northwest, specifically on the study, the fire attack study that we were on. And really good results, really good reviews about, look, this is what we needed. We needed to hear guys that were on there to kind of tell us the what the panel wanted us to get out of this. So that's what we need to do, and that's the problem. Again, we know fire service, right? They're gonna go right to what they want to get to. It's bathroom reading, right? That report is. So how much time do they spend there? So they're only going to take take really what they want out of a report. So that was a concern we had, and I don't know how we get past that.
Yeah, I agree with you, Tony. I think Chief Ricci, I agree with you as far as the cherry picking and on both sides. So even the advocates of a transitional attack, it's not very well understood how long do I flow water into that window or into that opening. What are some of the benchmarks or key points that I'm looking for to know that it was an effective quick hit or transitional hit? And I think going to Tony's point, the reports are very, very long, and they're very data heavy. I think if departments can find one kind of nerd in their department who's willing to go through all of that stuff and package it into a somewhat digestible content that's a little step above the executive summary, a little step above the tactical considerations, and can start to paint a little bit of context around that that's tailored to their department and how they operate. I think that is kind of the missing piece in a lot of this stuff is someone who can really get their hands and arms around this data and customize it for their department and how it makes the most sense for what they have showing up to their first alarm.
We're also putting it in a way that all the membership of the department can understand it. You know, I clearly remember sitting in Northbrook on the exterior fire and attic fire tech panel and talking about making the training pieces simple and simplifying. And I tell you, I never want to piss him off again, but Chief Van Dorp, probably one of the first times I was introduced to him, he went up one side of me, down the other. He came around back for more on making sure that we didn't dummy this stuff down. And he's absolutely right. You know, we can't dummy it down, but yet we have to make it digestible so we can all understand it. And in all of our departments, take my department, I'm a very small department. I got members that have greater than 30 years on, the members who are, 18, 19, 20 years old. Their learning styles alone are at complete opposite ends of the spectrum. So we have to make sure that when we put these training programs together, that we hit all of the learning styles of our members. There's no one, just like the tactics, there's no silver bullet. There's no silver bullet for delivering this information. That's where I found results on really pushing the fire behavior, because I feel that the greater understanding of the fire behavior and the fire dynamics your membership have, the easier it is for them to understand the pieces of the research and the tactical considerations, because they know they could see and understand the positive and also the negative effects of all of our tactics. If we could figure out how something's going to work good and also bad based on the fire dynamics, then we can look at, well, what tactic is right for this fire?
And I think you hit it on the head, PJ. I think that's the why component. And a firefighter that understands the why is able to make tactical decisions when things aren't exactly how it's written in the book. That enables them to operate in the gray better and be able to overcome obstacles. So some of our procedures, if we start just saying this is what you do and we legislate all the things you're going to do and we take away that decision making by eliminating that why, that's a tough part. That's why I love the tactical consideration part of the report. It is a little bit lengthy, but it gives you that in-depth of why we should be doing something, that explanation to it. And we can't get away from keeping that why is so important to understanding the foundational information that we're even discussing here.
Sean Gray? You're still on mute. You're still on mute, Sean. There you go.
I know. There you go. Sorry, Frank. Sorry, Frank. PJ, I know will give up. So, but anyways, one of the things about the pieces with the timing, that's the part that I hope people will get out of their heads. I know that's what everybody wants to see. What can I do faster? But man, it depends. You could take my company, who I would consider very well trained. We're going to smoke another company just 2 stations over. So the timing, it differs on every single engine crew. And so get away from the timing piece. Start thinking about the fire dynamics and what your hose streams do to that, what our ventilation does to the fire. If we could really start focusing on that piece, focusing on the fire dynamics and how our tactics affect the fire, I think that would be a huge win. Yes, the reports are long. I can tell you in the advisory board meetings, for years now, several years in a row, we've talked about how do we make this easier. And like PJ said, he got chewed out by Chief Van Dorp. So I always am very
We lost Sean. It must be that great Wi-Fi connection in Georgia that he has.
I think a goat might have chewed through his internet connection. What's with the goat shirt?
Well, now that
I think what. Go ahead, PJ.
Yeah, it's okay, Shay. Sean, if you could still hear us, you totally froze there for a minute. It looks like you might be back, but we're going to go to Shay, then you could come back. But also like to thank Chief Carroll. He had to jump out. So Chief Carroll, we appreciate you jumping on today and helping us out. Your input was extremely valuable. So Shay, go right ahead.
Yeah, I was just kind of dovetailing off of what Sean was talking about. I mean, it is a lot of complex things. There's a lot of variables at play. But the tendency to want to oversimplify it and make it bite-sized and fun size is very tempting. And I think that's kind of the result we're seeing with kind of having these two sides where everyone just kind of picks one little tidbit that supports their argument or supports their emotional attachment to the tactic in question. But while it's very complex, I think I've had a similar conversation with Chief Van Dorp about we have to be intellectually intelligent enough to be able to parse through that stuff and apply it to our companies and our resources and our building stock and those kind of things. And at the end of the day, it just comes down to whether you're willing to put in the work and the time to completely understand what the data is telling you, what these studies' goals are. But like you guys were talking about, if you're just looking for one little piece of that, if you're just looking for something to support your argument, you're going to find it. And if that's all you're touting, then you're missing really the learning that can take place. And oftentimes it's the things that you didn't expect. It's the things that don't support your argument that are going to really help you progress in your knowledge of fire behavior and how this whole thing, how all of these studies work, in my opinion.
Agree. So I want to try going back to Sean Gray. Hopefully he can hear us. Frank Ricci wanted to know if it was a goat that chewed between his Wi-Fi connection there. We're happy with that. Sean, you want to explain the whole goat thing to Chief Ricci? Because now he's questioning your shirt there.
Yeah, so we actually have goats at our station. I know. It's some county commissioner, rather than wanting to pay some guy to come out and do the lawn care of the weeds of the retention pond next to the station, decided to put a fence around it and put goats in. I can't make this up. Put goats. So we actually have 3 goats. Let me just tell you, the community comes by and visits the goats more than they come and climb on the fire trucks. The goats are a hit. And it's ridiculous. But
do they have names?
Yes, they do. Yeah. Dookie, Deborah, and Darlene.
Nice.
So the triple D's. But yeah, so that's where the goat house comes from. And then, of course, one of the guys added in dots in between, greatest of all time, that kind of stuff. But that's what it's for, man. Look at the back of the shirt. I can't look. It's got a big goat on it.
Can't see it.
Can't say it.
Oh man, I'll get you one, Frank. I'll get you a goat house patch or shirt.
I'll wear it. I'll wear it proudly. I'm only going to wear it when I'm reading your book, though. Okay.
Okay. All right.
I'll give you a little like Fox News shameless plug here.
All right.
Chief Lee.
Yes.
Got any goats in your city and any of
your No, we don't have any goats at the firehouse. That's yeah. That's definitely, so that's the difference in the environments, right?
Yes.
Be careful, though. There's a famous picture from Anthony Avillo in, I think it's Union City, New Jersey, which is very urban and very, they had a fire and they had a butcher shop and they didn't know it was a very ethnic butcher shop. And they had to corral all the goats that were inside the building. And there's a picture of master streams where they use barrels to herd the goats into a pen outside in Union City. So it can happen anywhere.
Yeah, so I'm not saying we don't have goats in stores like that, or chickens, or any other animals. But none at the firehouse that I'm aware of.
All right, so what I want to do, we're kind of getting down to the end of the show. Got about 5 or 6 minutes left, so I want to go to Shay first. And Shay, I'm looking for give you a couple minutes. Talk about the research, talk about what you're doing, talk about some of your pet peeves, talk about some of the things that you think we should be doing. Or it's your chance to take a minute or so just to talk about what we've talked about before, or go in a different direction before we go on to Chief Lee and Sean before we say goodbye for the day.
Sure. I guess for me, this is, obviously the first technical advisory panel I've been on. The experience itself, to be able to sit in a room with 20 guys that, you've been reading about and, you've read their work and followed them closely for the years is a pretty heady experience to start with. I think it's important that going forward, as the research continues, we continue to have a really diverse blend of fire service representation in those panels. Obviously LA County and FDNY, Miami and Seattle, they're going to be able to they're going to have the resources that cities like Richfield and some of the smaller cities that really do represent the vast majority of the fire service. That we just can't touch that. We can't. You're talking about things that are so unattainable to, having 2 engines with 3 guys in each in the first 10 minutes. We're just trying to get our arms around the problem and do what we can with the very limited staffing we're getting. So I think it's important that hopefully the UL continues to get a really good blend of what the current American fire service really looks like. As far as pet peeves, I think I touched on it earlier. I really don't like when either side oversimplifies a super, super dynamic, complex process with tons of variables. It just isn't as simple as being able to break it down into whether it's an acronym or whether it's, pulling off, if you see fire, you hit fire. I think we just need to get away from making it a bite-sized educational opportunity and really start to embrace fire behavior as a core of what it means to be a firefighter. The understanding of fire behavior as a chemical reaction really needs to be at the core of what it means to be a firefighter in modern day America, with respect to the continuing evolution of that knowledge, right? I mean, you can have a really good understanding of what fire behavior looks like in a fuel limited fire, which proves somewhat I don't want to say useless, but not very pertinent with today's fires, right? There's very few fuel limited fires that we go to as far as structure fires. So if that's the knowledge that you gained and you haven't continued to progress and evolve with the evolving fireground, little plug there for your book, which is a great book, by the way. If you haven't continued to progress your knowledge along with the environment, then you're going to be left in the dark and you're going to have kind of an archaic view. And if you don't have the adaptability and open-mindedness to go with it, then you are often going to be one of those people who are dissenting on what is clearly an obvious change. And you're going to a little bit be left in the dust by some of these newer guys who are a little bit more malleable to learning the newest and most up-to-date information and data. So I think, to sum it up, I think if you're trying to derive what our fire department should do by what UL is telling you, you're really misunderstanding the point. The point of UL is to give you information to make your firefighters, your citizens, less likely to have a bad day. And the onus is on each individual member or each individual department to really spell out what that means for them tactically, in my opinion.
Okay, that was a great sum up. I really appreciate you said. Thanks for the plug of the book. And really what I got a lot out of that too is a little hidden message is burn more dollhouses. Right? The more
absolutely.
The better you can get. And that's a good lead into Chief Lee, because I'm not far from the city. I'm still waiting to go down to New York City and help them burn some dollhouses and hit the giant. I'm not sure if that's actually will ever happen or not, but hopefully someday we can get to that, Chief.
Kids, lock your doors.
We'll have you come anytime you want, even if you come to my firehouse and we demonstrate it for my firefighters. But I think besides the fact that Shay took up the whole 5 to 6 minutes, he hit it perfectly. That was like he summed it up perfectly, right? It really comes down to taking the tactical considerations and molding them to understanding them and placing them into place for your department based on all of the things we've been discussing today. The other quick point I do want to make is that when we're talking about transitional attack and some of these tactics, while it may be a tactic of opportunity, especially for New York City when the situation is right, it was mentioned earlier that it's sometimes a defensive tactic. Sometimes it is, but I would say that when we use it in New York City, and certainly the way I've heard Cobb County is using it, it's an offensive tactic in the way it's being employed, because it's being done in conjunction with other tactics, and it's another line going in the front door. So it's not just based on staffing. There's times when you should be doing that, no matter what your staffing is. And I think that's what Sean and his department is doing, and that's what we're moving towards. When it's appropriate, you do it. When it's not appropriate based on staffing or the built environment, then you don't do it. And I think that was also hit by Tony earlier as well. So I only used a minute to leave a minute or two for Sean.
All right, so real quick. So PJ, you mentioned our search culture earlier, and that was one thing that we really changed a few years ago, was really focusing in every structure in Cobb County we consider that there is someone in there. We are going to send people in to search the structure. Now, what that does is that helps us focus. That's where a lot of our tactics have come in, and the research has gotten into it, because we got guys that are doing vendor search going in windows while fire streams are coming in from the exterior and being knocked down. I know that's kind of unheard of. It's like, oh my God, guys are doing opposing streams, but it's not. I mean, we are really focusing on what's the fastest way that we can get to the possible victim. So in the end, for us, people will usually ask, what about the victims? And I think it comes down to two things: is what can you do faster? Can you remove the problem away from the victim, or can you remove the victim away from the problem? And use that as your timing piece.
Great point, Sean. Frank?
Going back to the aggressive or not being aggressive, you can be aggressive and be smart. And I think that a lot of the conversation needs to focus on kind of a more, not such a myopic view, but a more global view. So I'll go back to we had a fire in a liquor store and a deli in a taxpayer that you could find in any community. It doesn't have to be in the city. And we were aggressive, but we applied the science, and it worked great. We had a 2.5 in the front door. We told them to hold off on breaking any of the plate glass windows. We actually shut sliding glass windows, controlled the door, got the 2.5 in place, and then I got a company with 1 3/4 inches to stretch across the caulk loft as they were cutting a hole in the roof. The fire went out, and now that business is going to be back in business, saving jobs in the city tax base. So it's not an all or nothing thing. You can work pieces of the puzzle. Just like even before the studies, we were teaching that when you go in a room conventionally, you shut the door if you don't have a hose line. Indoor control. The fire doesn't know how you entered, if you VES'd or you came in on the inside. So I think one of the things that could really move this conversation forward is if we just don't focus on the fire's blowing out the front window, what are you going to hit it? I think we need to talk about the fire ground as a larger thing about what's going on with search, what's going on with if the fire's blowing out the rear of the structure, then you're not going to be able to hit it out from the outside in a lot of departments, urban departments. It's just not plausible in timing wise. So I think we need to look at the big picture and realize that we can still be aggressive and apply science. We're doing it in New Haven. It works, and we just need to be so cautious on both sides of the spectrum to keep it a little bit in the middle, because I heard one of the chiefs on my job say, "Oh, we don't need to get the roof anymore." No, we just need to make sure that's coordinated. You don't get the roof in New Haven, you're going to be standing in the front yard the whole time. So there's things that we want to do, but you can apply the science and be aggressive, coordinate your tactics, and do your job.
Agree. And that kind of goes back to the way I started, is all these conversations, including this one today. What occupies our biggest time, whether we should utilize exterior water or whether we should not use exterior water. And a lot of the other pieces of the research get lost in the argument, right? And it happened to us today, and that's how we started that. We didn't want that to happen, and it did. So I encourage everybody to look at the reports, look at the training modules, and truly look at all of the research. Don't just get bogged down on exterior water or interior water, right? There's many more pieces of the research that we should all be looking at. That's for the benefit of our community. We always want to say it's for them, right? We want to do the best for them. Well, if it's truly for them, we'd be looking at all the research. We would be looking at the close the door committee, right? The close before you doze, and looking at your fire prevention education models. You'd be looking at your search culture, your fire tech culture, your forcible entry culture. What's your truck company doing when they're forcing the doors? We don't have bulkheads in my department, but Chief, when they're opening up the bulkhead, are they opening it, leaving it wide, or are they controlling it? There's lots of pieces of the science that we all need to look at, not just exterior water. And I hope that that could be drawn out of the conversation today. So I appreciate everybody coming. We're kind of over our time limit here. Shay Filikowski, Tony Carroll, Frank Lieb, Sean Gray, Frank Ricci, myself. Thank you to everybody for joining us today. For our brothers and sisters out there who are suffering from the line of duty death and from the 2 non-line of duty deaths that we mentioned, our prayers and our thoughts go out to each and every one of you, to the members of the departments, the families, the friends, the co-workers, as well as the fellow instructors, or the FDIC hot instructor that we lost this week. Please keep them in your thoughts. Just about all of those deaths have GoFundMe accounts set up and memorials set up that you can donate to. So take a look if you could dig into your pockets a little bit and help out those funds. I know there's a lot of people out there that are hurt and can use a little bit of help right now. So for Fire Engineering and today's Google Hangout, we thank you very much. We appreciate it. We look forward to seeing you the 4th Wednesday of next month, and it's Frank Ricci's month, so he'll be picking the topic. So as always, it will be a lot of fun and interesting. So thank you very much, everybody. Have a great day. Stay safe.
Thanks, guys.
See you guys.